Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, B Nation. I'm David Kale. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the CEO at Fully and the board chair of BLocal PDX. And this is probably a good time to talk about what BLocal PDX is and our relationship to BLab, because technically we're two distinct and unaffiliated entities. As many of you know, BLocal PDX is a group of certified B Corps here in Oregon and Southwest Washington, working to foster and deepen connections among organizations in our region who share our purpose and passion for using business as a force for good. We work to provide certification support for aspiring and existing B Corps, connections for growth opportunities, and collaboration around social and environmental impact. And just to make sure we're all clear, certified B Corps or B corporations are for-profit companies that use the power of business to build a more inclusive and sustainable economy. They meet the highest verified standards of social and environmental performance, transparency, and accountability, and are certified by the nonprofit BLab. Of course, BLab does a lot more than certifying B Corps. They're at the forefront of the discussion around transforming the global economy to benefit all people, communities, and the planet. Imagine a regenerative and inclusive economy that works for all. And so today I'm excited to introduce the new CEO of BLab for the US and Canada, Jorge Fontanez. Jorge has dedicated his career to the pursuit of achieving racial equity through economic equity. He has worked in the corporate world on the marketing and brand strategy for brands across a variety of sectors like Colgate-Palmolive, Alcoa, JP Morgan Chase. He designed a course on stakeholders and marketing and lectures at the Bard MBA in Sustainability program. Jorge also serves as advisor to the NYU Center for Sustainable Business and has been a first mover fellow at the Aspen Institute for Business for the past 7 years. Two-time Webby Award winner in the category of corporate social responsibility. He's also been involved with a number of nonprofit organizations committed to a range of issues related to youth, education, and social justice. Jorge identifies as Afro-Latinx queer of the Puerto Rican diaspora, who was born and raised in Philadelphia and currently lives in New York City with his partner of 18 years. And in August, he was named BLab CEO for US and Canada. We are so fortunate as a movement to have Jorge at the helm, and I'm excited to introduce you to Jorge Fontanez today. Take it away, Jorge.
Thank you, David. It's so great to be here. I have to say I'm slightly overwhelmed by your introduction, which I appreciate so much, and really appreciate all of the production, the level of production that you all have put into this conference. You are the first event within the BLocals community that I'm attending, and it feels really good to be here. So thanks for that kind introduction. Also, congratulations on your 5th anniversary. I think that milestone should also be celebrated, and it is so wonderful to see you all continuing this tradition in a virtual way. And I would be very excited to be invited back to be with you all in person when that time comes. As David said, while I am new to this role as CEO for BLab US and Canada, I have deep experience as well in businesses working for multinational companies. And for the last decade, in particular, I've been spending a lot of time and energy advising small and medium-sized businesses, especially founders of color, to connect them to both capital and knowledge networks. I want to start my talk here with a quote from Audre Lorde that I think helps frame not only my keynote here, but also the intention that I hear so well articulated in the opening so far. Audre Lorde was noted to say that there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. This idea and understanding that racial inequity is inextricably linked to all forms of oppression both through systems and structures that systematically disadvantage marginalized populations, are important for us to gain an understanding about. And it is why B-Lab's anti-racism statement recognizes and stands against all forms of oppression. So while we together focus on climate justice and racial equity, we also look at these issues through an intersectional lens, centering in particular the experience of some of the more historically marginalized groups, in particular Black and Indigenous women. What I'd like to do next is share a little bit from my perch, what I see in the B-Lab organization and throughout the community. Our theory of change, developed for US and Canada, focuses on cultural, behavioral, and system change. And that intention is defining our strategy through 2025. You all are hopefully becoming familiar with, or are familiar with already, the vision of creating an equitable, inclusive, and regenerative economic system. And I believe that in order to achieve that vision, it requires that we deeply understand how the issues of racial equity and climate justice are here with us today because of a history of unjust practices and policies. Recognizing again that these are interconnected issues that must be addressed together. And so this visual looks to share some of those principles of the work that is ahead of us. Rooted in our work is a stakeholder economy, believing that business creates value for all stakeholders, or that it should prioritize value for all stakeholders. That we are enabling climate justice to contribute to a regenerative, to regeneration, not degradation of natural ecosystems. And also that we're creating a racially equitable future to grow with, actively dismantling unjust systems along the way. And so let me lift up what I'm seeing in the community and how we are meeting the moment with our theory of change. This next slide speaks to the journey that we're on together. In just this past year, we have seen incredible growth and demand for our tools. A 60% growth, in fact, in new registrations on the B impact assessment. Today, we can say that nearly 150,000 businesses have registered on the B impact assessment since B-Lab started 15 years ago. The global B Corp community grew also 25% last year. And while we see demand continuing to grow and knowing how our tools are supporting this journey, we also continue to emphasize what it means to continuously improve in this work, because we know that there are more opportunities for us to make progress on our commitments. We're also creating communities of practice along the way to learn from one another. And I see that embodied here today, in fact. And so it's great to get finally a window into all of what's happening through BLD and in particular through BLocal PDX. And it is together that we will mobilize collectively to take positive, proactive policy action. In the next slide, there's more evidence of a resilient movement. During the last financial crisis, I've learned that B Corps were 63% more likely to survive than other businesses. And again, last year in 2020, the B Corp community once again demonstrated its resiliency in the face of challenge. As millions of businesses worldwide closed their doors permanently, more than half of B Corps grew in this time. More than half of B Corps hired more employees. About just the same, 47% of B Corps experienced employee growth of more than 15%, and 2/3 of you saw increased revenue in 2020. During the same period, we've also noted that 88% of B Corps hired a majority of their non-managerial workers from within their local communities, recommitting to the communities as a key stakeholder and a critical component to maintaining resilient businesses. The next slide also shows how we're building new practices and policies. From end to end, B Corps are somewhere between 34 to 94% more likely than traditional businesses who are not B Corp certified to have provided services, benefits, and enacted policies that protect all of their employees during the pandemic. These statistics energize me so much. And we can begin to look at the evidence of what we're seeing on the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion front. This next slide shows that in 2020, the B-Lab and B Global Network re-centered the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work, while also acknowledging that we can do better and that there are steps that we can take to improve. So just about 12% of B Corps are led or owned by racially or underrepresented individuals from Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, especially. Yet, almost 70% of you, 65%, I should restate that, B Corps are 65% more likely than non-B Corps to have conducted pay equity analyses by gender, race, ethnicity, and other demographic factors. And where necessary, implementing equal compensation improvement plans and policies. This is where I am so enthusiastic to see how B Corps are already making a difference. Another program that I hope you'll hear more about is Level, where we are looking to level the playing field. The next slide features the family of Heifer farms. And just for some historical context, I'll share that Black farmers in the US have lost 80% of their farmland between 1910 and 2007, often because they lacked access to loans or insurance needed to sustain their businesses. Today, Black-owned farms make up less than 2% of all farms in the United States. This is one reason why our team within B-Lab US and Canada and the community has been working to level the playing field. And the founder here, Clarenda Stanley, has noted to us that while the planting fields aren't level yet, through programs like Level, we can now celebrate that Clarenda is now the first Black woman-owned farm to achieve a designation as a B Corp certified business. We're also taking action, and you all are taking action already on climate. So I'm sharing more data that you've hopefully seen in our latest annual report. Next slide, please. At a high level, the Net Zero 2030 campaign already embodies what our theory of change is about, which is collective action and moving ahead of where policy is and where many business leaders are in terms of making commitments to counteract climate change. When compared to other businesses, from January 2020 through March of 2021, B Corps were 1.5 times more likely to be carbon neutral, 2.5 times more likely to have reduced their greenhouse gas emissions by 20% or more, and 68% more likely to use renewable energy. So when we think about the net zero by 2030 commitments, we should also know that we're bringing a lot of businesses along the way with us. In 2019, 500 B Corps initially pledged to that commitment, a full 20 years before the requirements of the Paris Agreement. And we are now at 1,400 companies making that commitment. And not all of them are B Corps, by the way. And this is the opportunity for us, is to not only lead through our actions, but also bring other businesses, B Corp and non-B Corp, along the way. I'll conclude by lifting up a tool that also embodies the work ahead. The Climate Justice Playbook shows how we're leading with urgency, and it centers the same voices that we believe from frontline communities can help us do this work better. The playbook itself calls on the global business community to make a fundamental shift in both mindset and behavior, to evolve from extractive and exploitative practices to regenerative and equity-driven. And we're putting those who are impacted by climate change at the forefront of driving these solutions. With your help, we'll continue to share real-world examples as we update this playbook moving forward, and through our communities of practice, look to give advice to each other and share the real human stories that are essential to understand how we move this work forward and how we make real progress on climate action. The next slide, again, is lifting up 2 other resources for us to deepen our understanding of the 3 pillars that you'll hear more about related to stakeholder governance, again, climate justice and racial equity. And I'm happy to share more about that either in Q&A or in conversation with David. But please look out for these tools, because these are how we are looking to share what we know so far on how B Corps can play a role. And we're looking forward to getting your feedback and engaging with us on which issues you'd like to take action on as well. And with that, I'll turn it back over to David. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jorge, for that overview. So appreciative of you being with us today. And I encourage the community that's with us here at the conference to, if they have any specific questions for Jorge, we're going to have a little bit of time to ask him directly. So you can use your Q&A box to pose those. And we already have one in there now. But one thing that I really would love to unpack a little bit with you, Jorge, because it can really be overwhelming when we look at all of the issues facing us as people in this world in capitalism. I know I can speak by saying it can be overwhelming. And a lot of the times I feel like the discussion is really centered around large corporations. What can the big companies do to solve this problem? And, you know, the B Corp community is really full of a lot of small businesses. The majority of certified B Corps are classified as small businesses. So I'm wondering what you would say to what can we do as a small business, as a small B Corp, as part of the B local community? What role can we play in this cultural shift?
Yeah, David, first, let me acknowledge that these issues are overwhelming, and we're living through an unprecedented moment in our lives, I would say. Where no generation living today has experienced perhaps the same level of intensity of issues coming together at once, particularly with the pandemic and having to adjust. And so I want to acknowledge that, in fact, when I think about small businesses, we know that small business is an economic engine, and it is a job creator for the US, and I think that may also be true for other parts of the world. And so I would say first that SMEs, if just, you know, for short, that's what we talk about, small, medium-sized businesses, are already a driving force. That in fact, we know that a large part of our community represents or is made up of small businesses, that there are some well-known brands that are part of the B Corp community, and yet they are only about 20% of the number of B Corps actually certified in the US and Canada. And it's not just the numbers that matter, but it's the action and energy behind it. And so, yes, we see that we may be in conversations with brands and companies like Patagonia, and there might be more attention being drawn to those B Corps that are more recently coming out to be public with their public offerings. But it's the small businesses in particular that created the B Corp Climate Collective, right? That pushed for B-Lab to create space back in 2019 at the Champions Retreat to begin thinking about how we were going to create urgency behind climate, and out of that came the Net Zero by 2030 campaign. I'm interested in an equivalent. You know, I think we have opportunities to create that same level of urgency behind racial equity issues as well. And we're listening. We're listening for how small business leaders in particular are finding agency in this moment, because it's important that we represent you well. And so maybe I'll just wrap up by saying the how small businesses can engage is as much defined by the community as defined by B-Lab. What I presented today is really a strategy. It's a theory, and we're working to build all of the components that will help to realize that strategy. And we know we can't do it without the B Corp community behind us and leading.
Yeah, well said, Jorge. And I think that we'll see lots of opportunities over these next couple of days on all of those three legs of the table on how we can engage at the B local level. There was a question that came into the Q&A chat about, where can we learn more about supporting Black-owned farms and Level? So Rose, thanks for putting that link directly from the B Corp site on what we can do to vote with our dollars to make sure we're supporting Black-owned farms and just raise awareness around Black-owned farms as well. I have another question as well that's come in regarding the B local communities, Jorge. Certainly, we talked a little bit about the role B-Lab plays and the role of the B local communities, and certainly here at B Local PDX, we're focused on building community, supporting one another, experience sharing, creating best practices. As it relates to the local and regional networks of B Corps like B Local PDX, in the theory of change, how do climate justice, racial equity, and stakeholder governance show up on a local level? And how can local communities like B Local PDX play a part in mobilizing for collective? I know this is sort of similar to the first question, but a little bit different on manifesting these things at the local level.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question because when we think about mobilizing collectively, we can think at a local level. So I'm thinking about your theme, the theme for today's talk, and I know the conference theme is about transformation, and we're talking about what it means to transform through change, which I think has many meanings. Actually, the more I reflect on the theme. For me personally, so let me just say a little bit about me. As you said in my introduction, I come from the Puerto Rican diaspora. I live in a neighborhood in the borough of Manhattan in New York City that is still largely has a large Puerto Rican community. And through the pandemic, there was great evidence of how the community came together and how we could support each other. And that support continues through I'm trying to think of the word, but open fridges, open refrigerators with where basically food can be shared, stocked, and anyone who needs, can go and get the food there. Mutual aid, of course, throughout the country, but also in New York City became an important part of supporting elderly and those in need throughout the community, as well as helping to recover and rebuild throughout the pandemic in New York City. So I believe very much in the power of local connection to bring forward change. And so I think there are some recent examples actually that, if you all haven't seen in our newsletters, are actually asking B Corps to call their congressperson to call their senator. Our most recent initiative for the White House initiative on inclusive economic growth includes a policy docket that has most recently been signed by Senators Warner and Feinstein and Van Hollen. And there was a similar letter sent by representatives from the House in support to a letter to the administration in support of our White House initiative. It's time and an opportunity, or I should say it's timely for B Corps to dig into some of the policy work and call your senator, call your congressperson, and open up a conversation about how, as a B Corp, you've been already living into these values and that you support the policies that are in those resources, in those tools. So I do believe that we have an opportunity to build pressure in DC, but also locally, at least from a policy standpoint.
Thanks, Jorge. We could talk all day about this. We've only got a minute or two left because we have so much more stuff to come. Certainly, there's a lot of folks who are looking to get recertified or getting certified for the first time. So we know that there's a lot of that B Lab is a little backlogged on processing those things. One question that came in is how's the standards team holding up, given the massive influx of new submissions for certification? We can talk about that one, but I'm going to allow you to answer that question directly. Yes, there's a lot of demand to become a B Corp. There's no doubt about that, and I know that B Lab is doing a lot there. But finally, this last question is for someone who's just dipping their toes into the B Corp world, and to keep it from being overwhelming, what are the top 2 or 3 messages you'd want them to focus on during this conference and in the next few days, weeks, and months? So I'll leave it with that, and we can close it down with you answering that one, Jorge.
Particularly for people that are new to the movement?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I would say is, as I hopefully shared in my keynote, I'm already learning a lot from all of you. And so I would invite you to learn from each other. Yes, we have developed some great tools that each of you can dig into, and the work is only as good as our ability to connect around the work and have good conversations about best practices and sharing those best practices. So I would definitely reinforce what you've already created here, which is peer-to-peer connection. I know that other members of my team are joining, and so you'll hear from Marielle Martin, who's created an amazing set of resources for the Black, Indigenous, and people of color network, but also for anyone who's interested to deepening their own personal journey around what it means to become anti-racist. Not only is that part of our site quite beautiful in representation, with beautiful images from an artist who we commissioned to do that work, but there's some real valuable information for each of us to learn from, because this journey is both personal, interpersonal, and institutional. And so I invite you all to dig more into that work and to listen to what Marielle has to say. We call her Madi, about the work and the community that she's built for the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Network. Awesome.
Jorge, thanks so much for being with us today. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
B Lab, and best of success to you. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah and the gang from here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.